second module, that is risk. Basically, it is the risk associated with the derivative instruments. Yes, it's a risk associated with investment in derivative instruments. Okay, and in today's class, we would be discussing about what is risk in derivative instruments. Then basically, the risk associated with derivative instruments can be classified into three. One is commodity market risk, two is currency market risk, and the third one is capital market risk. So in our today's class, we will be dealing with commodity market risk, types of commodity market risk in currency market, types of currency market risk. So that will be the topic for our today's class. Okay, now just take one by one. Risk we have been learning since we have started learning about commerce, finance, because in every angle, the chance that if you are deviating from the expected results, the chance factor of deviating from the expected result is we tag as risk, or we name it as risk. The concept is called as risk. So in this concept also, in this context also, the context of derivative market, chance that an investment's actual return will be different from what we are expecting. There can be a chance of we may be incurring a loss or a lesser profit than what is expected. So that deviation, it can be more also. That deviation is what we call as risk. So risk is more with the chance of deviating from the actual to the in a decreasing mode, or maybe the chance of incurring loss. We say that the risk is very high. So when I'm talking about risk, it talks about the chance of variation from the expected risk. That is how we use that same concept in the derivative investment also. Because when I am planning for derivative is one instrument which will help the investor in hedging against the risk. Definitely. Instrument also. The primary reason for that is the value of a derivative instrument is derived upon the value of the underlying asset. So every change in the value of the investment will make this instrument risky. Say, for example, if I've invested in commodity, maybe I have invested in vanilla, and the chance that there are equal chance that vanilla price in the international market can go up or come down. Right, there can be a change in the price of this particular product, and that chance of change in the value of asset due to change in the value of underlying asset is what we call as risk in case of a derivative instrument. That's what we call from the perspective of risk when we are talking about a derivative instrument. Directly, yes, it's an instrument used for hedging against the risk of price fluctuations. It is actually anticipatory. If I'm saying that, yes, there can be a fall in the price of currency, in the price of dollar, that's what I'm expecting. And I'm entering into a contract with another person who is expecting that the price of dollar can increase. Right. So that is actually a contract where we are trying to hedge the risk of fluctuation into each other's basket. And if I win, definitely the other person is going to incur loss. That's a basic logic. Now, here in this context, that's why we say that any change in the price of the underlying asset is what we call as risk in the context of a derivative instrument. This can be asked as a university question where you have to give your answer by giving justification. So your justification can be based upon these factors. Okay. Now going with first, as I said, the derivative instruments can be broadly classified based on the underlying asset. The first category is commodity. The second category is currency, and the third category is stock. These are the broad categories of derivative instruments which we can find in the market. Of course, there are interest rate swaps and all different variations to that, but primarily we are talking about these three aspects. And yes, commodity market, as we all know, it derives the value from the underlying commodity, and that commodity can be gold, palladium, coffee, vanilla, or copper, or any other physical metals in that case. Right. And when we look into a commodity market, it is more volatile than other market. That is the trend which we have found in India. The reason here is there is frequent fluctuations in the price of commodity based on demand and supply. Of course, if it is as we say, if it is a farm produce, naturally the climatic condition and other external environment is one factor that can guide the price in the commodity market. So that's why we find this market to be more volatile when we compare with other markets. And so the risk element in commodity market is, because the fluctuation is very high, the risk element in commodity market is estimated to be comparatively higher. And the predictability is dependent on many factors, which again is very difficult to arrive at. It is very difficult for me to predict what would be the amount of course, the experts may say that yes, this year we are going to get this much rainfall, or the humidity is expected to be this much, or the highest temperature can go up to 28 to 20, as it can be said, but it's not sure that that is going to happen. Right. If that deviates, there can be a variation in the farm produce, and this will affect the price of the what we say, the price of the product. So accordingly, the volatility in the derivative market is pretty high. That's why the risk is high. And when we are looking into derivative, there are two types of transactions which we can normally find in a derivative market. One happening to the regularized stock exchange. It is a standardized trade happening to the through the exchange commodity. There are a lot of across the globe, lot of commodity exchanges are there, both national and international. And when the trade is happening through that platform, we call that as exchange traded commodity derivatives. Other one, OTC, over the counter traded commodity, is basically a contract between two parties. So it is customized, the rules, everything, basic rules guiding the derivative instrument will be there, because in India, it is happening in the capital market, and of course, the regulators of money market and capital market will take care of it. But when we are talking about an OTC, it's actually a customized contract depending upon the needs of both the parties. So the amount of risk involved in such transactions would be little high when we compare to the exchange traded commodity derivatives, because the intermediary to such transactions are almost nil. Even though there are guidelines, the actual regulator to that will be present only in exchange traded commodity derivatives, because in exchange traded commodity derivatives, the concept of margin money comes, and the concept of collateral will come when we are going with commodity trading. Nothing is mandatory when we deal with over-the-counter markets. It depends on the need and the interest of both the parties entering into a contract. That's why we say that there is exposure to OTC traded commodities little higher when we compare with the exchange traded commodity derivatives. Now we are looking into the types of risks which can be there in a commodity market. The first one is credit or counterparty risk. Credit or counterparty risk is the default or the risk due to default of payment or delivery of asset. Uh, and this risk is little higher when we talk about OTC, because in stock market, it is mandatory that your asset need to be, whatever be the underlying commodity, that need to be delivered to the warehouse before you enter into a transaction. So the default due to non-delivery or of the asset, or non-payment is very less when we compare that with a standardized, when we compare that with the OTC in case of a standardized, because that's already there is a deposit which is being made by the party who enter into a contract. And of course, the asset is also stocked at the warehouse in case of standardized contract. But OTC, maybe this is present, or maybe most of the cases that might be absent. So that is why there is a risk of default being made by either of the party, maybe with respect to payment, or it can be with respect to delivery of assets. Because in some cases, the commodity, underlying commodity value can increase very high. It can go up to maybe 10-20% difference. In that case, the party who is willing to sell the commodity may not be in a comfortable position, because he can get higher, much higher than that when he tries to sell that in the real market, in the spot market. So that is why that a possibility, the risk, one risk can which can arise in a derivative market is the risk of default in payment or in delivery of asset. Now, the second one is market risk. As we all know, the market risk is directly related to the price movement. It is related to the increase or decrease in the value of underlying asset. So when I'm talking about the underlying asset, suppose if the value of underlying asset increase to a greater extent, accordingly, in a standardized trade, we need to keep our margin little high. Right. So that is the risk that can arise because of the fluctuation in the value of asset. There can be decrease in the value of asset. Accordingly, one of the party can be at loss. So that is also a risk due to fluctuation in the value of price. Then liquidity risk, as I put in the bracket, it is basically related to volume of trade and pending trades. Suppose if there are enough money in the market, if there is a lot of buying and selling happening in the market, liquidity risk is less. But if the transactions in the market is limited, there are no buyers or no more sellers, or maybe sellers are more than buyers, that is a condition of liquidity risk. You find it very difficult to sell off your asset and land into a liquid position. So that is what you call as a liquidity, because you have the asset with you. Okay, you have the asset with you. You went into the market, you bought maybe you, without possessing the asset also, you can be a trader in the derivative market. We have learned that you bought the asset, but then you find that there are no sellers for your contract, no sellers for that, for your instrument. Accordingly, you are going into face the liquidity risk, because your money is blocked in that investment. You're not able to recoup it by selling it. That position is what we call as liquidity risk in a derivative market. Now, legal risk is, no, as we have said, no, many of the derivative instruments are complicated ones. It's hard to understand, because that has been laid down by, people who sit and think and make different variety to enter into different contracts. So the legal protection, the absence of legal protections in OTC market, or maybe those that is not happening within the standardized stock market transactions, within the preview of standardized stock market transactions, the level of legal protection is little less. And when that is absent or less, that is what we call as legal risk. Because at times, if the other party is not willing to satisfy the contract, then there is no regulatory body who will come in to enforce the dealing to be settled, or as you say, enforce the dealing to be executed between the parties. So in that case, there is something called as legal risk, but that is something which is inbound with every derivative instrument. And again, if you are into the complicated way of designing derivative instruments, as it happened in some of the in the developed markets, like credit default swaps or exotic swaps, all these they went into, and it became very difficult for the regulator to have a control of these transactions. Now, as we say, with respect to bitcoins or cryptocurrency, the legal restrictions or the kind of legal protection that is given to the investor is comparatively low, because it's an evolving system. So this can also happen in the derivative market when it is a self-designed, complicated derivative instrument. Right? So that is what we call as legal risk. Then operational risk, it happens because of the loopholes in the operation. Maybe because of that, people commit fraud or errors, or they go into many malpractices, and ultimately the traders, the genuine traders, are put at risk. So this is all risk that is being connected with the operational aspects of this derivative trade will be brought under that box called operational risk. Model risk, of course, I already said. Legal risk arises when your model is complicated, and model risk talks about going with regulations and conditions which are associated with complex derivative instruments. Because as we said, no plain vanilla instruments, maybe the model risk is very less. But as you go beyond that, as you go beyond the general rates, conditions, regulations, there exists something called as model risk, because there can be lack of clarity in many of the settlement or many of the legal issues connected with them. So there exists something called as model risk. So in short, these are the broader perspectives of possible risk that can be associated with a commodity market. The first one, as I said, it is with respect to default of either parties. It can be the buyer or the seller. It can be in case of put option or call option. Market risk is associated with fluctuation in the price of securities. Liquidity risk is associated with market not able to settle the transactions, or it is very much related to the pending trades, less number of buyers or less number of sellers in the market. More it happens because of less number of buyers in the derivative market. Then we are talking about the legal risk that happens primarily because of lack of regulations or legal protections in many of the transactions that happen in the commodity market. Operational risk, definitely it is connected with the type of operation that is being conducted in the commodity market. And any loopholes in such operation, because it's all most of it is electronic way. So any malpractice within the system also can cause a risk to the traders, as we know, hacking or any malentry into the or function of the system. All these can lead to something called as operational risk. Model risk is associated with the complication involved in building different models. As the complexity increases, model risk also will be increasing. So that's all about the commodity. We said commodity derivative deals with those instruments which are having commodity as their underlying asset. Now the next one is currency market, where the underlying asset would be currency. It can be dollar, it can be euro, it can be yen, or any other currency as the case may be. And definitely the return from a currency market depends upon the fluctuation, the kind of fluctuations that are happening in the exchange rate across the globe. Maybe you are dealing with dollar in India, but the currency fluctuations that is happening in NASDAQ or in New York Stock Exchange definitely will have a play in the market price in India. So that's because of this, as we say, open economy or globalization. So the return depends upon the fluctuation of the exchange rate. And what you have to understand in a currency market is the role played by individuals are very less. Mostly currency markets are headed by banks and other financial institutions, because they are in need of currency from different markets. Maybe if an exporter, I as an exporter, I can approach a bank for my currency requirement. Bank or financial institutions, they are in need of different currencies, and depending on the need, demand of each currency, different contracts are made in derivative market. Now let's look into the types of risk associated with currency market. Currency market is one of the active derivative market in India with when we compare with the other market because of the active role played by financial institution, especially banks in the country. Now, as I said, exchange rate risk, it is which we know that it arises because of exchange rate fluctuation in different stock markets, in different currency exchange markets. And that fluctuation, there are many factors that can cause such fluctuations. It can be internal as well as external factors. Like, no, I talk about the country specific risk. Country specific. Now you can see the kind of calamity that is happening in Israel, which is definitely going to affect the entire country. So the country specific risk will definitely have an impact on the currency of that respective country. Right. So that both of that is, that's why I have put them together. Country specific risk and exchange rate risk, they are interrelated. Apart from that, there are many other things, because dollar, most of the transactions, because it is happening in dollar, even when we make exports from here, or when we get imports from other nations, mostly in order to bring some uniformity, payments can be made in dollar. So the demand for dollar as a currency is always high in the general case. So that's why demand is one factor. Other than that, there are a lot of economic factors. Suppose if the GDP rate of a country is very high, definitely the exchange rate of the currency of that country would be high. Right. So there are many other factors, but basically exchange rate risk is one important risk that will be faced by institutions who are engaged in uh, dealing with currency derivative, where the underlying asset is currency. So exchange rate, country specific risk, it may vary from country to country, but definitely that will have an important impact on the exchange rate also. Interest rate risk, since we said that the derivative transactions are mostly undertaken by banks, sometimes they take up extra, they use their extra fund for investment in currency derivatives or for purchase of lot of currencies, because interest rate, when the spread is low, they try to enter into capital market or money market to make, you know what is spread, right? The difference between interest income and interest expense. That's what we call as spread. And when the spread is very low in a market, these banks, they try to invest in currencies, or they try to enter into derivative market as well as capital market. So depending upon the moment of interest rate, there can be a risk that is associated with banks, because and of course, there is another thing. If interest rate is decreasing uh, for the banks, they will have, as we say, they will have less income when it is concerned with investments. So anything that is related with, it is not direct actually. Interest rate risk in a currency market is not direct, but it is indirect, because interest rate market movement itself will have an impact on stock market. So because if interest rate is high, people will not be much interested to invest in stock market, because that's a little more risky. But if interest rate is very less, people will look for new avenues to invest or to lodge their money, as the present situation in India. So that's why they are related, may not be directly but indirectly. So any risk associated with the movement of interest rate in a market can also affect the currency derivative instrument, the return from a currency derivative instrument. That's why we say that interest rate risk is also there. Liquidity risk, of course, the ability to convert your asset into liquid cash. If there are less transactions happening, if there are less demand in the market, less investors in the market, liquidity risk would be very high, which is applicable to both commodity market and currency market. Credit risk, of course, default of non-payment or delivery of asset is equally applicable to commodity market and currency market. Leverage risk is related with the price movement of currency, which is very high when we look into a currency market. Because if it is happening in a standardized market, and if the value of a currency fall, maybe the entire margin money may be lost for an investor, because the loss will be taken up from the margin money. And the reverse can happen if the price fluctuation is moving into is showing an increasing trend. So leverage risk is affected, is directly related with the price movement of the asset within the market. And settlement risk, in the present perspective, it is comparatively less, and this happens mainly because of the difference in the time zones between different countries. Say, for example, in UK, US, and all, they are advanced. But no, in country like Asia and all, that happens at Japan and all, it happens at a later stage. So between those, this is primarily important for financial institutions who are having international transactions. That can affect, because sometimes the position of one person can change even before the market is opened here in India. Because the market in developed countries, they are already opening and they are undertaking transactions. So if it is an international transaction, because of the time zone difference, because of the difference in time zones, maybe the position of a particular investor can change even out of the trading hours. So this happens with respect to international trade. That also, so settlement may be at risk. Sometimes the other party becomes is declared pauper, or he lost all his assets due to a particular transaction, due to the failure of a particular transaction. Automatically, his position in India or in any other country also will be affected. There is a risk associated with the settlement capacity of that particular individual or financial institution. That's what we call as settlement risk. And when we are talking about transactional risk, it is associated with the kind of transactions happening, or the complexity of transactions happening, similar to what we call as operational risk in a commodity market. The kind of, if it is a complicated transactions that is happening outside the market, there will not be a regulator who will be looking into or enforcing that. Right. Even financial institutions, they can go with reckless transactions, which can result in loss of money. And what we have to remember is most of these financial institutions will be having public deposited fund. So that is going to affect the entire economy. So those that are connected with transactional risk, or the kind of transactions being undertaken by the market. That's what we call as transactional risk. So in short, the derivative instrument is an instrument for what we call hedging of risk. But still, because the instrument derives its value from the underlying asset, all the risk associated with the underlying asset will be more or less applicable to the instrument also. Right? So that is why we have discussed all these different types of risks that are associated with the currency market as well as commodity market. And tomorrow we are going to discuss a new concept, which is value at risk, which is very much related to what we are discussing now. To summarize today's class, today we started with what is the risk, and we said that any possibility of deviating from the expected result, we call that as a chance factor or risk factor. If I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get the result as expected, the risk level is 0. If I'm totally uncertain about or not sure about an outcome, that situation is called uncertain. The path between certain and uncertain is what we call as risk. If I'm very sure, risk level is 0. If I'm not sure at all, the risk level is uncertain. The path, the route between the certain and uncertain is what we call as risk. And then we talked about risk in derivative instruments. Risk in derivative instruments, are broadly associated with the risk of the underlying asset. Of course, then we talked about what is commodity market risk. Here, the particular nature of commodity market risk is it is dependent on the underlying asset, which is commodity. And when we talk about currency market risk, any risk that is associated with the underlying currency, mainly it can be fluctuation in the value of currency, that will be considered as a currency market risk. Now, simply if someone asks whether there is any systematic risk associated with a derivative instrument, the answer would be yes, because derivative instruments happen in a market, either in a money market, depending upon the nature of the instrument. It happens either in a money market or in a capital market. And there is no market, either money market or capital market, which is free from what we call as systematic risk. Now, what I can do is I can diversify, carefully plan, and what I will do is revise my portfolio occasionally to minimize the risk exposure. So systematic risk is part of derivative instrument also, because again, the value depends on the underlying asset. And we also talked about commodity market, where you can find both individual and institutional investors. And when we talk about currency market, we mainly come across institutional investors like bank or financial institutions. That does not mean that there are not much individual investors. There are few big exporters and importers would be interested to enter into commodity market, as well as into currency market, as well as the non-resident Indians who are making investment in different non-resident Indians, or it can be any nation who are interested in making investment in different countries. They also might be interested to engage in currency derivative instrument. So that's it for today.